Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who'd been on a visit to South Africa, had to cut his visit short because of the overnight attacks by Russia on Kyiv. Leaders of the Ukraine and South Africa held conversations about the war in Ukraine. The South African president hoping to provide some covering for Ukraine in the face of the attacks from Russia. Our President Cyril Ramaphosa has reiterated his country's commitment to speaking to all parties in the conflict. It's an expertise in negotiating settlements following the end of the apartheid regime. He claims a call with the U.S. president yesterday was not tied to Zelensky, and that the call had been months in the planning. Zelensky is unwilling to depart from his red lines, reiterating that there could be no talks of compromise without a complete ceasefire, and that the fact that Ukraine was willing to sit at the negotiating table when it was Russia that started the war was compromise enough. I will hear from the South African president in just a second, but just to highlight a lot more of what he said earlier, President Ramaphosa said South Africa is extremely concerned about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. He believes the only way to peace is through diplomacy, inclusive dialogue, and commitment to the principles and Charter of the United Nations. The Ukrainian president highlighted the killings that have been going on in Ukraine and later talked about Ukraine's offer to South Africa of a joint mineral hub for the production and transportation of fertilizers that supports the entire region and has significant potential in the agricultural sector.
Huge scandal yesterday. I remember some emotions seeping into the media on that, but emotions, well, they will remain emotions. Russia dislikes any union around Ukraine because if Ukraine is alone, it will become a much easier target for Russia. Though frankly speaking, for 3 years of this war, we've shown our big strength, and actually we are stronger than we were in the early days. Believe us, we are much stronger now, but probably it is us who want the most this war to stop. This is our shared desire. And that was the starting point of our talk and meeting with President Ramaphosa. It was the primary consideration, how to stop this war, how to coerce Russia for this comprehensive unconditional ceasefire.
The war manifests itself in many ways and at any time, and that is why we're calling for an end to this war. This is a war that has not only affected Russia or Ukraine, it has also affected a number of other countries. That is why the African Peace Initiative leaders went to Kyiv and Moscow to plead for war and to call on the leaders, to plead for the end of the war rather, and to call on the leaders to sit around the table and negotiate the end to this war. All wars do come to an end, and it depends at what stage they come to an end, and we say it should be sooner rather than later.
The Ukrainian president may have received a warm welcome from the South African government, but not from some sections of the polity in South Africa. As protests held earlier today, members of South African organizations saying they support Russia. Amongst them are members of the MK Party and the National Assembly.
Zelensky is not welcomed here because we don't want Western imperialists here. During the President Zuma's presidency, we joined BRICS. We are part of the BRICS Plus countries. And as MK, we are not apologetic about it.
We are here to demonstrate that we are anti-Ramaphosa, inviting Zelensky to our country when he knows very well that South Africa is a member of BRICS. Now, for him to invite a man who has been associated and who is really a facilitator of NATO's agenda against Russia.
Joining us now is Professor of African History, Peace and Conflict Studies at the Institute for Peace and Strategic Studies at the University of Ibadan, Professor Olawale Alberts. Professor, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you so much, Amarachi, for inviting me.
Yes, and it is important to get the African perspective on this. So let me just get your take right from the start. President Zelensky going all the way to South Africa, that is a very different direction, we've seen him go in the last few weeks.
Well, I think the visit is a strategic step by Zelensky to find a lasting solution to the crisis Ukraine is having with Russia. Zelensky is interested in the war ending, but he is opposed to the conditions provided by by President Trump. President Trump has provided two exit strategies. The first is for Ukraine to provide America to give America access to its resources. And I think this created a conflict between Zelensky and Trump. And then the recent suggestion by President Trump is that Ukraine should give up part of its territory, give Crimea to Russia. So these two suggestions are not agreeable to Zelensky. But what Zelensky is trying to do now is to take advantage of the strategic relationship between South Africa and Russia. The two of them have a very warm relationship. South Africa is part of BRICS, and beyond that, President Ramaphosa and the president of Russia are good friends. And now that Ukraine is having problems with Trump, I think what Zelensky is strategically trying to do is to look in the direction of the relationship between Ramaphosa and the president of Russia. And I think this might help. Unfortunately, as you have just shown on your program, we have South Africans, some South Africans staging street protest to say probably this is going to harm the relationship between South Africa and Russia. And I think the invasion of Kyiv, last night by Russia is also probably part of the strategies of Russia to register its protest against Zelensky's visit to South Africa. But it is all an attempt to open a new flank for actually discussing the end to this crisis.
Yes, and the South African president, people think that, because of, the end of apartheid and some of the negotiations that he's been involved in, with the Israel-Hamas war, we have seen South Africa take some really strong positions. So not surprising here that they are standing with Ukraine in this war. But, we've talked about the African angle to this crisis between Ukraine and Russia. And the South African president mentions the African Initiative, no, not the African Initiative, I'm sorry, the African Peace Initiative that had sent a delegation to Russia a couple of years ago to appeal to the Russian president. We saw the way the Russian president treated the South African president, and we also saw him talk down to most of those African leaders. You think that any suggestions that are made from South Africa or even anywhere in Africa would at least be considered by both sides?
Well, in 2020, when nations of the world were invited actually to make their positions known on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, some African states actually came out to condemn, they clearly condemned Russia. But South Africa was neutral. And South Africa was neutral because it was part of, it's part of BRICS. But since then, Ukraine has been investing heavily in actually getting African states to understand its stand on this problem. In November 2024, I can remember that I was one of the 5 scholars, African scholars, that were brought to Kenya to meet all ambassadors, Ukrainian ambassadors in Africa. We met them. They presented to us their own perspective. And the point they are basically trying to make is that this conflict is better understood from the context of imperialism. You know, invasion of Ukraine to the Ukrainians can happen to any weak nation. So it's like a big country trying to assert its influence on smaller countries. It could happen to Africa. And therefore, they tried as much as possible to present their situation to us in Africa. Unfortunately, all African states have good relationship with Russia. And therefore, the position of African leaders is to work towards, you know, peacemaking. And therefore, in 2023, as you have rightly said, South Africa led a delegation of some African leaders to Russia and to Kyiv, you know, to look for ways of actually bringing the two of them together. But America has always been acting as that big global power that would always want to occupy bigger space than any other parts of the world could provide. And that is why the American influence on this matter is big. But a mediator does not dictate, as Trump is trying to do. Trump is trying to dictate to Ukraine. Trump is not dictating to Russia. And I think this is why Zelensky is now looking towards Africa for opening a new window of opportunity for peacefully discussing and ending this crisis.
People, I mean, have thought about the U.S. President Donald Trump's intervention in Ukraine. I mean, before he became president, he said he would resolve the Russia-Ukraine issue in about 24 hours. We're going 100 days in office for him in the U.S., and you know, there's still no end in sight. The Russian government agrees to a ceasefire, then violates it, and then Ukraine also violates a ceasefire. The Ukrainian president lambastes the Russian government, saying that Putin does not want peace in Ukraine. You can't hold him at his word. Putin's words mean nothing. And then you have a U.S. president saying Ukraine is trying to frustrate the whole process. I mean, if anyone was to take sides in this, where would you pitch your tent?
No, it's very clear. We have principles of mediation. And I think what Trump is pretending to be doing is to serve as a mediator. There are principles of mediation. A mediator does not take side. You know, in addition to providing two difficult conditions for Ukraine to meet, America called Zelensky several, you know, ungodly names. You know, one of them is that Zelensky is a dictator. A mediator doesn't do that. And I think, to me, I think what America is trying to do, you know, Trump's America is trying to do, honestly, is to further escalate this conflict. And I think this is why Zelensky is now looking towards Africa. You know, Zelensky is looking towards Africa because all countries, all the big powers are trying to get Africa on their side. The resources they need, the mineral resources they need, the human capital they need, they are here in Africa. So all countries are looking towards Africa. All countries are trying to be friendly with African states. And I think that is what Zelensky is trying to take advantage of, to say, look, if we come to Africa and succeeded in getting South Africa on our side, all other BRICS countries in Africa probably will begin to sympathize with our situation. And then if we also package the rhetoric in anti-imperialistic, tone, then probably African states too will begin to see themselves as a possible target of these big powers. And I think this is what we're witnessing. It is all politics. And the bombing of Kyiv yesterday is one would describe that as gunboat diplomacy. To say, look, continue your discussions in South Africa, but we continue to prove to you that we have the resources for making your system ungovernable. And I think that is what Russia is doing. Zelensky too is doing what he thinks should be done. But I think the president of South Africa is playing the game well.
I wonder if it ever occurred to you, why the Ukrainian president never thought about Nigeria. I mean, we are a superpower in Africa. Why wouldn't we be involved in mediation?
Well, to be honest with us, to be honest with all of us, Nigeria has lost its, the diplomatic power and strength that Nigeria had in the past is lost. One, because our international diplomacy is not scientific. The things we do, the way we conduct ourselves on the international scene is not scientific. Then two, we have our own internal problems that we are managing. And in the process of managing our internal problems, we create what one would call more collateral damages to the existing system. There is reputational damage, and our voice in the international system is not as good or big as it was. All our embassies abroad are empty. We are not actually asserting ourselves in the international system as we saw, most especially under President Obasanjo. So I think many of these countries now are looking in some other direction. I attended a meeting in Washington, in California, in Sacramento, where a small African country in West Africa claimed to be the leader of West Africa. And I mean, the president came up with a number of factors why he should be considered to be the leader of West Africa. But so we are not sufficiently asserting ourselves as a nation that should be, regarded as it should be. In the past, we were giant of Africa. People refer to us as the giant of Africa, but we are no longer giants of Africa, because even when we attend academic conferences, our colleagues from small countries, don't speak well of us.
Well, the Ukrainian president is on his way back to Ukraine following the overnight attacks by Russia. And I just wanted to point out, every time he's on an overseas trip and there is an attack on Ukraine, he hurries back. Let's talk a bit about that for a second, because this really is how world leaders should behave. If there is, a crisis back home, you should cut short your trip. But we don't see that, especially here on the continent, when leaders are out of the country, we don't see that urgency to return when there is crisis back home. Just talk a bit about that, please.
Well, I think that is part of the problem that we are having. We have what we call global early warning and early response systems. We are a country, Nigeria is a country, but the other countries of the world are reading us. They are not just reading us, they are marking us. And things that make countries great, we fail to do. And things that could actually cause reputational damage, we do. So what is expected is when your country is on fire, we expect you as a leader to run back to your country, as a sign of commitment to actually finding lasting solutions to the problem, as a sign of sympathy for those affected by the problem. But when you look at the history of Nigeria for the past 10, 15 years, we have never been conducting ourselves that way. 20 killed today, 100 killed tomorrow. So it's just number. People just say, look, yes, it happened, and then, we condemn it, and that is the end of it. Now, all these are the things that members of the international community take into consideration in assessing countries. On annual basis, we produce what is called Global Peace Index. So if we are going down the scale, if we are not doing well on Global Peace Index, it is not just because of the fight against Boko Haram or whatever. Several factors are taken into consideration. If you have no respect for your citizens, if things happen and you do not give your citizens the right kind of support, the right kind of assurance, and then you have situations where people are gravitating more towards self-help, then you go down the scale. People will say this is not a country that actually takes issues of peace and security seriously. So what Zelensky did is what is expected of African leader. And that is also part of what Russia wanted him to do. Russia did not want Zelensky to stay too long in South Africa. Hence, the use of that gunboat diplomacy. If we bomb your country, we know you will run back. And we know you will not have sufficient grounds for discussing all the issues that you came to South Africa to. So it is pure scientific international diplomacy. They are all playing politics.
Professor Olawale Alberts, thank you so much for giving us some thoughts and I hope a few chunks to chew this afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Once again, thank you for inviting me.